Adrian Bethune, welcome to the Along the Journey podcast.
So much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Of course. Can we actually teach a kid to be happier, or is happiness just a part of who they are, something they're born with?
I think we definitely can, and we know we can teach children, adults to be happier. Obviously, temperament, personality comes into it. There are people that are born, with temperaments that are more optimistic than others, and other people that are born that are slightly more pessimistic. They look firstly to what's wrong rather than what's right. But we know from multiple studies, we know from neuroscience that neuroplasticity exists. And neuroplasticity is essentially your brain's ability to learn new things, to change, to grow, and to adapt. And neuroplasticity is what enables us to learn any new skill, whether it's to ride a bike, to learn how to read. And so many experts, including Professor Richie Davidson, says that we need to look at well-being and happiness as a skill. It's something that we can learn. It's something that we can practice and improve. We make physical changes in the brain when we practice new skills. And his research has shown that when we practice the skills of well-being, our well-being improves. And there are physical changes measurable in the brain because of it. So, yeah, I definitely think children are born with different personalities and temperaments, but we can definitely teach children to be happier.
Yeah, we'll definitely dive into how to exactly go on the journey of happiness later on. But I guess just to backtrack a little bit before we dig into the how of happiness, I'd just love to hear about how you came to this work and what drew you to children's happiness and well-being in the first place.
Yeah, so I got into this work, I guess, kind of accidentally. I was working for several years in the music industry, worked for a record label and then music publishing companies. And it was whilst in the music industry, I went through a period of poor mental health. I experienced a period of anxiety that led to a period of depression. And as someone that is naturally, I think I was mostly born this way. I'm kind of a happy-go-lucky kind of person. That period in my life really threw me. I'd never gone through anything like it before. I'd had anxious periods in my life, like studying for important exams, etc. But this was very different. This was anxiety that just wasn't going anywhere. It was getting worse, and every aspect of my life was affected. I couldn't sleep properly. I lost my appetite, couldn't really eat. And things that would normally bring me pleasure and joy, I just kind of felt a bit numb to. And so I then, as an adult, I was 28 at the time, I then went on this journey of essentially getting better. So I saw a counselor, which really helped. I started to kind of research causes of stress, anxiety, and depression to really understand what I was going through and what I was experiencing. And I learned loads about mental health that I just didn't know before. And I also discovered that there was a science of well-being or a science of happiness. And the science of happiness is described by some people as the scientific study of what makes our lives worth living. And I found that field of research kind of fascinating. And so I started to make kind of small tweaks and changes to my own life and lifestyle. I started to experiment with meditation and mindfulness, started to exercise more, really started to think about my sleep hygiene. And some of it was really practical. And some of it was stuff I just hadn't come across before. And it was really eye opening for me. And so once I was kind of feeling much better, I was in a much better place mentally and physically. 2 years after that period, retrained to be a primary school teacher. And it's partly because in the science of wellbeing literature, volunteers, people that volunteered their time, are often rated as some of the happiest people in society. And so before I retrained to teach, I volunteered with this charity in London where I mentored a young child, 9-year-old boy, who was at risk of being kicked out of school for his behavior. And so I mentored him for a whole year, and working with him and his family, I found it so rewarding. That was what made me want to retrain and teach. And then when I got in the classroom, I just wanted to teach these skills that I had learned as an adult that on reflection, I wish I'd known growing up. And so that's what led me to kind of teaching the skills of happiness and well-being in my classroom and teaching practice.
That's a wonderful story. Let's just jump in. Like, what is the science of well-being that you teach within the class? What is the science of well-being?
Yeah, so the science of well-being is, I guess, the field of research is a multidisciplinary field. So it's psychologists, it's health scientists, nutritionalists, neuroscientists, economists, and they're all looking at well-being from different angles. Some of them looking at it on a macro level, like, big picture, how can we make society happier? And some of it more on an individual level. And really, it's, yeah, how can we take good care of ourselves and how can we take good care of each other? That's how I broadly kind of see the science of well-being. And so on that personal level, Professor Laurie Santos is a well-being hero of mine. She's based at Yale University. She says that people underestimate how important, taking good care of ourselves is. Good sleep hygiene, eating healthily, exercising our bodies. These are like the foundations to our happiness and well-being. And so I would teach my class about, I called it taking care of your body and taking care of your mind. So yeah, we would do lessons on healthy eating. We would do lessons on the importance of physical activity, not just, let's just do this exercise. It was like teaching why, what happens in our brains and our bodies when we exercise. So we learned about the heart and how our heart pumps more blood oxygen and glucose, which is energy, up to our brain. So it helps us to be more awake, be more alert, to concentrate better. And yeah, and I introduced him. I just did a little mindfulness meditation practice because outside of school, I was doing a course in mindfulness. And so it was kind of more a throwaway comment. I was trying to connect with my class and say, I'm learning something new, and taught them about mindfulness and did a little meditation. And it was actually like the next day I was on playground duty and a child in my class said, Mr. Bethune, when are we going to do meditation again? And it was just, it was often led by the children's curiosity. So yeah, it's often small things. It's taking care of your body, taking care of your mind, and it's, yeah, really practical. And from my experience of teaching children these skills, they are genuinely interested. They find it often more interesting than standard curriculum content because it's about them, it's about their lives, and they start to make connections and they think about their parents. And I've had so many parents come to me and say, "Oh, thank you for teaching my child about meditation and mindfulness because the other evening I was really stressing out about some work problem. And my son came up to me and said, Mummy, I think you need to take some deep breaths and we'll count to, and the children guide their parents through these practices. So, yeah, that's kind of how I started teaching it.
That's awesome. So, with kids and mindfulness, it seems like they just have a completely unique approach to mindfulness compared to like us as adults. This is certainly something I've noticed from my experience teaching mindfulness. Just maybe talk a little more about the differences between how kids approach mindfulness and what what is really unique about mindfulness in kids that you think is really valuable in terms of your teaching.
Yeah, I would say children generally, it's a big sweeping statement, but children generally are more naturally mindful than adults. And what I mean by that is if we start with a definition of mindfulness, one definition is paying attention in the present moment to what's happening in your mind, your body, and the external environment with an attitude of kindness and curiosity. And so children, I've got two sons myself, they're 8 and 10 years old. Really little children are naturally mindful. They are really, in tune with their bodies. They're really curious about the world around them. You can be walking with a child, my son along the road, and they just notice something and they stop and they want to explore it. As we get older, we kind of lose touch with that innate mindful curiosity, I feel. We go on to what some experts called autopilot more frequently. And that's where your body's doing one thing. You might be walking down the road and your mind is somewhere completely different. You might be thinking about the lesson you're about to teach. It might be the meeting you've got coming up or what you're going to have for dinner. And you need certain ingredients from the shop. And just a slight tangent, the problem with being on autopilot, it's essential that we have the autopilot. Like I put on my shoes this morning, I tied up my laces whilst I was having a conversation with my son. Autopilot frees up your mind to do other things. If we didn't have the autopilot, every day that we woke up, we would really have to think consciously about how we put our clothes on, how we tie up our shoelaces. Because we've automated those processes, it frees up our amazing minds to deal and think about other things. But the problem with autopilot is studies show that when our minds are wandering, we tend to be less happy and satisfied with our lives. And some studies show that adults, their minds wander sometimes as much as 50% of the time that they're awake. So mindfulness is such an important skill to make you aware of where your mind is, and then you have a choice. If it's thinking about something else and you really want to pay attention to what's happening now, you can consciously bring your attention to the present moment. Um, and this is where mindfulness training comes in. Regularly, you're going to have to keep doing that because our minds naturally wander off. And so we have to intentionally practice that skill. So, yeah, when you teach children, one, I feel like they're naturally mindful. Two, because you're teaching them this skill, you're teaching them often about the brain as well. They're genuinely, from my experience, intrigued and interested in learning about it because mindfulness is something you experience in the moment. You know, although this isn't the desired goal, you're not trying to achieve this state of mind. A lot of children say, when I practice mindfulness, I feel relaxed, I feel really calm. So yeah, children experience that, and therefore that can be quite motivating for them to want to kind of practice some more.
Yeah. I also think that kids have so much more of a simple life compared to adults in many ways. Like, just from my experience growing up, as you get older, there's more things on your to-do list. There's more obligations, people you have to live up to, meet. And as a kid, that simplicity to life can open the door to curiosity about how they operate in the world.
I agree. Yeah, I think as we get older, you're right. Our lives tend to get a bit more complicated, a bit busier, and therefore it is more of a challenge to be mindful, to stay present, to be curious. We often jump to conclusions. We're trying to predict what the future's going to hold so that we can, overcome or avoid certain barriers and challenges. And generally speaking, children have fewer of those hurdles to overcome, and so it can be easier to be more mindful.
Yeah. And let's now shift gears a little bit into some things that parents can do to facilitate happiness and well being in their kids. So, you often describe happiness as pleasure and purpose over time. What does that look for a young child, and how can a parent nurture happiness within the household?
Yeah. So just to speak a bit about that definition, it comes from a English professor called Paul Dolan, based at the London School of Economics, and he says that happiness is about your experiences of pleasure and purpose over time, and that we're trying to get the balance right between the two. So pleasure being those things we enjoy in the moment. They're joyful, they're fun. We might be laughing, enjoying ourselves, experiencing a sense of love, gratitude, hope, optimism, essentially a positive emotional state. Pleasure, some psychologists refer to as happiness in the moment. I feel good right here, right now. We all know, and this is part of the teaching in a family, your children about happiness. It's not possible to be in that pleasurable state all of the time, and sometimes we make ourselves unhappy by trying to achieve that. I just want to feel good. It's not possible. We will have highs and lows, ups and downs, disappointments, frustrations. And so a really key part of teaching children and families to be happier is understanding that there's a full range and spectrum of emotions, and we can lean into, accept, embrace the full range. um, Move over to purpose. It's when we spend time with people on projects, hobbies, work that is important and meaningful to us, but crucially does not necessarily feel pleasurable or enjoyable whilst you're doing it, but it still contributes to your happiness overall. And that's why some psychologists refer to purpose as like future happiness or future benefit. So right here, right now might be doing something that is good for my well-being from a purpose perspective, but it's a bit boring, or I'm like resisting it, or I wish I was doing something more fun. And that's a really interesting one to share with children, that the difference between pleasure and purpose, because regularly parents ask their children or get their children to do things that they know is good for them, but it might not feel good right here, right now. So, like, for example, we have a dog, and my wife and I, one of the things we do for our family's happiness and well-being is we go for dog walks outside in nature, and there's so many different facets that are good for your well-being there. Exercise, really good for your physical and mental health. Socializing, being together as a family unit, really good for your mental well-being. And then being outside in nature, very good for well-being, lowering stress, boosting immune system functioning, etc. Could go on. Now, my two sons, when you say, right, boys, we're going to go out, take the dog for the walk, no, they would much rather be gaming or kicking the football out in the back garden, doing something that they are finding fun right here, right now. And so, as parents, we kind of have to, no, we're going on this dog walk. This is what we do. And so there can be resistance, and it can very much feel like in those moments, this isn't great for well-being. My two sons are resisting it. They're moaning. I'm feeling frustrated as a parent. But we've done it enough times now, my wife and I, to know that without fail, once we are out with the dog and we're going for walks and we're chatting to our boys, and the boys, they can bring their football, they might be dribbling and kicking the ball, once we're there, it really starts to kind of benefit us. And that is an example of a purposeful activity. We need to walk the dog because he needs his exercise. We need to exercise, and we want to kind of bond as a family. um, doesn't necessarily feel as good in the moment as the boys playing on their games console, because that is real good fun. But once we're out and about and we're chatting, we're having fun, etc., there is more of a balance on that dog walk. So anyway, yeah, I find pleasure purpose a useful framework for looking at family well-being through. And sometimes it's about sacrificing some pleasure in the short term for something more purposeful, which is going to benefit us in the longer term.
How do you make the transition from a short-term pleasurable experience into a walk or something more long-term that's purposeful? How do you get over that initial resistance that kids might face?
I think sometimes, like I said, because we've done enough dog walks now, we can remind ourselves, um, boys, once we're out in the park, you really enjoy it. And then when you're actually on the dog walk and they're climbing trees and they're having fun, my wife and I will specifically say, boys, do you see how good this feels now? Um, when you're at home and you really didn't want to come out on this dog walk and now you're really enjoying it. And we literally say, please remember this next week when we go on this family dog walk. So I think psychologists sometimes call these activating events. We've had enough activating events. We've been on enough dog walks as a family to different places to kind of refer back to those. Do you remember when you were climbing trees and often what happens is at the end of a dog walk, when it's time to actually come home, they don't want to come home either. They're having too much fun. And so that's a nice kind of 360 to kind of go on with your family. Yeah, that's kind of how we get over it. We kind of remind them how much fun they do have when they're actually out there. And when they are on the dog walk having fun, we really kind of emphasize it, which is in a way a mindful approach. We're tuning into, do you notice how good this feels to be outside climbing trees in the sunshine? Really pay attention to it and soak it up.
How much do you focus on mindfulness specifically as like a discipline when you parent your kids, or is it more of a byproduct of how you engage in your parenting? Where does mindfulness fit into your journey as a parent?
Yeah. So it's a really good point and question, because this is true in the classroom as well. You certainly can't force a child to meditate, and you wouldn't want to, and you can't force them, or, to be mindful. The best way, and I think the research really backs this up, best way to introduce children to mindfulness or to benefit from it is for the adults that care for them to be more mindful. So one, my two sons know that I meditate. They will regularly, see me meditate. I'll often take myself off to another room, and they might come in and say, "Daddy, where is my?" Oh, sorry, because they see that I'm, quietly meditating. Occasionally, they might join in with me. More my youngest and my eldest, I might like pat the chair next to me and say, "Do you want to join in?" Because I'm often listening to a guided meditation on my phone. So yeah, one, they are aware of meditation. I talk to them about it. They see me doing it, and sometimes they join in with me. So in that sense, I'm role modeling. I never knew about mindfulness or meditation as a child. I didn't know about it until probably I was mid-20s. I certainly never saw my dad meditate. So in many ways, they've got a head start because their dad is meditating. They've seen me do it from when they were very little. And then the rest of the time, they will benefit from me being mindful, i.e., kind of responding to situations rather than reacting, being, calm and curious myself. Yeah, essentially, hopefully being a kind of nicer, kinder human being to be around. But there is one big caveat, which is mindfulness doesn't make you perfect. Like, I still lose my temper. I still get frustrated. I'll still raise my voice. I'm a human being, I'm fallible, I make mistakes. But at the same time, I still feel like my mindfulness practice helps me when I realize I have overstepped the mark or lost my temper, or, you know, I will apologize, or I will go and speak to my sons and say, "Look, I'm really sorry that I lost my temper then, but, you know, X, Y, and Z, you were not listening to me after 3 times of me requesting that you did something, etc., etc." So you know, it's called rupture and repair from a psychological perspective. Every relationship will have ruptures, disagreements, fallouts. And the reassuring thing for me is that the repair is the most important bit, that repairing is the coming together again, understanding each other, apologizing. So, yeah, even mindfulness does not stop you losing your temper, is I guess what I'm trying to say. We all have those moments where our children push our buttons, refuse to do things we've asked them to do, and it becomes very frustrating no matter how much mindfulness practice you've been doing.
Yeah, mindfulness, it can certainly help with preventing yourself from losing your temper, but I
Yeah,
think the real value of mindfulness is having perspective over the whole journey of emotion from no temper to temper.
yeah, yeah. So I am more likely to notice
Mhm.
when I'm starting to spiral, and that gives you then more opportunity to catch yourself. But when you haven't caught yourself and you might have, lost your temper, again, there's that more space afterwards to be like, actually, that's not how I wanted to respond to that situation. I'm going to bring myself back down, and I will deal with it more calmly now. So yeah, there's more space before the event. There's more awareness during the event, and then there's more space afterwards.
Yeah, this reminds me of mindfulness can serve as a building block for our own development within our lives. So I know you've talked about mindfulness, gratitude, kindness, and movement as building blocks. If a parent could only start with one of these things tonight, where would you point them?
I'm gonna I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna share two,
Okay.
because I really find it hard to pick them apart. So what the example I've given, I'd say is really important, like exercising with your family, and that doesn't mean an exercise class, but getting outside in nature with your family, going for a walk, conversing, connecting, having conversations. So good on multiple levels for our well-being. And the other thing I would say is, from a young age, it's really important to like read with your child. And again, there's a lot of research that shows that parents that read with their children foster a love of reading from a young age with children. Reading helps children regulate their nervous systems. You know, we still read with our two sons. They're 8 and 10, and it involves close physical contact. You know, you might have your son snuggled up and you're sharing a book together. But the two examples is ultimately about connection, you know, connecting with your children. They're two different ways of regulating emotions. Reading has been shown to help regulate emotions, but so has exercise. And it's just that close physical proximity, being together with your family. So yeah, I would, if I had to choose between one of those two, I couldn't. So I'm cheating and saying both of them are really important.
And reading and exercise are forms of mindfulness, I think, in
Yeah,
themselves. Really, mindfulness is not exclusively meditation. You don't have to meditate with your kids. You can do so many other easy activities and see the results from that. Yeah.
yeah. It's impossible to read a book in the moment if your mind is somewhere else. Like, how can you read the words if you're
Yeah.
thinking about something else? It's impossible. So it's a mindful activity. It's quiet, it's still. And then walking, yeah, outside in nature. You know, my back doors are open now. It's a really lovely sunny day in the UK, and I'm just watching lots of different trees, different colors of leaves shimmering in the wind. And it's very hard not to be mindful when you're outside in nature. And just this is again, slight little tangent. There was a study done, it was around outdoor learning, but it was in like kind of kindergarten, very young children. Where this study looked at kindergarten children taught in kind of traditional classrooms, and then kindergarten children typically taught in outside classrooms. And what this study found was that the children taught in outside classrooms had a much wider vocabulary. And the researchers concluded the reason was, in a traditional classroom, the classroom doesn't change that much. The lighting, the walls, the paint, the floor stays the same the whole year. Whereas outside in nature, throughout a year, the seasons change, nature changes, the color of leaves, leaves fall down, the insects that you see. And so the children outside, or learning predominantly outside, had to come up with and use a much wider range of vocabulary to describe what they were seeing and experiencing every day. And that is the power of nature as well. You really have to tune into it. And so again, it's like you said, it's a naturally mindful environment to be in.
Definitely. Another question I have is, so much of your work is about the small, low cost, high impact habits. What are a few things that can translate super easily from your classroom teaching to, say, the dinner table or bedtime?
Yeah. So I've given those two already. You know, if you've got a dog, take it for a walk with your family. If you don't, still go for a walk with your family. Doesn't cost anything. Reading together every night where possible doesn't cost anything. Amazingly good for kind of your child's well-being and your own. Another activity which I use in the classroom is called What Went Well, and it's to help rewire our innate negativity bias. So the human mind has an innate bias towards the negative, and what this means is we pay more attention to things that have gone wrong, that might go wrong, negative events, because it's a survival mechanism. If those events happen again in the future, if we're thinking about them or aware of them, we can avoid them. The problem with it is we can get fixated. We can spend a whole day at school, and this happens with my two sons. How was your day? And they just talk about, you know, my teacher said this to me and it was unfair, or so and so didn't share at lunchtime. And they just go down this negative route. And so, what went well is, and this can be over the dinner table, is just reframing that conversation. So, rather than saying, how was your day at school, which is a big open question, saying to your child, what went well for you at school today? Or I might frame it with my boys as, tell me something funny that happened at school today, or what was one interesting thing you learned today? And it's just immediately shifting, rather than leaving it open and therefore the negativity bias is likely to just kick in. That's the most salient memory, is typically the most negative. It just reframes it and just points that spotlight on something positive from the day rather than negative. Um, And that doesn't mean you don't give any airtime for something that didn't go so well. But a bit like well-being being a balance between pleasure and purpose, like life itself is a balance between things that didn't go so great and things that did go well. And so we don't want to just focus on the negative. We want to focus on the positive as well and just create a bit more balance.
When a negative emotion or topic does arise with your kids, what is your approach to parenting?
I think it's really important that you validate your children's feelings. And psychologists would say, like, validating your children's feelings doesn't mean that you have to agree with them or even like the feelings. Validating means you're just giving space for those feelings to exist. So, validation is important, giving space for the emotions. Like, it's really counterproductive and potentially harmful if you minimize children's feelings. So that might be like a child feeling a bit anxious about or worried about going to school that day and you're getting ready in the morning. Minimizing would be, oh, don't be silly, you're absolutely fine. You're not worried. You got your best friend to see today and you got physical education, you love that, you're fine. So you give them no space at all to feel what they're feeling and you minimize it. Um, yeah, ridicule is really harmful where you say things like you're being silly for, feeling that way. So giving space is and validating is, oh, I'm sorry to hear that you're feeling worried. Is there anything that you're particularly worried about? And it might be that they got told off the day before and they're worried whether their teacher will tell them off again. Again, you're being curious, trying to find out a little bit more. And then it might be that you then shift towards the positive. So if my son wasn't looking forward to school, listen, try and dig a little bit deeper, and then I'd say, well, one thing that you can look forward to today is seeing George, your best friend, or just try and shine and point them in the direction of something that they can look forward to that day. Or ask them, is there anything today that you're looking forward to? Well, in computing, we're doing some research about X. Okay. Well, when's that? That's in the afternoon. Well, at least you got one thing today towards the end of the day that you can really look forward to. And so it's just kind of little things like that, really giving a bit of space to their feelings, validating them, letting them share what is on their mind, and then maybe in an encouraging way, just pointing them towards something positive that they could be looking forward to that day. And sometimes it might be that, well, I'm not looking forward to anything today at school, for example. I might say, well, for dinner tonight, I'm cooking carbonara, your favorite meal. So at least you got something in the evening to look forward to, So it's, again, just using little tricks, techniques like that to, yeah, to help your child navigate what they're going through at that time.
Yeah, I think that's a very compassionate outlook on negativity and approaching that. So kudos to you.
Thanks.
If a child took away one lifelong habit for their own well being, what would you most want it to be?
I would say, from my own personal experience, some kind of meditation, meditative practice can be really powerful because what it has enabled me to learn and understand is that through mindfulness meditation, I am regularly on a daily, weekly basis tuning into how I'm feeling in that moment without trying to change it, fully accepting it, embracing it. And what I have learned over the years is that there isn't really any feeling, mood, emotion that I cannot handle because I've sat with everything. I've sat with anxiety when I was 28, and I first started to get into mindfulness and super, super anxious. I've sat with those thoughts and feelings. When my dad died 3 years ago and I was grieving the loss of my dad and I was meditating, I was sitting with that grief and that loss. And, all of these different experiences that you have in life as a human being. And when you sit regularly and you get to the end of a practice and you realize, okay, that might have been quite difficult or uncomfortable, but I'm still here, I'm okay, and I've given myself space to feel those feelings. Yeah, there isn't any feeling or emotional mood that you have to fear, and that is so freeing and empowering. So I would say that at some point in a child's life, if they get onto that path of learning to be mindful and it carries on with them, yeah, I just think of my own two sons. If they were away at university and as adults, young adults, and they're really anxious about something, but they had the skill to just sit with those feelings and not try and suppress them or run away from them, I'd be really confident for them that they've got this and they're going to be okay.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think as kids grow up, one of the best things you can do, because at some point you're not going to be with them all the time and they're going to be up to themselves. And the question is, can you allow your kids to be by themselves and handle whatever they may handle in the world? And so this lens of mindfulness meditation really can enable them to approach the world with inner peace regardless of whatever they may face. And I think what you just shared really taps into that.
I agree.
So those are all of my questions for today. Do you have any final messages you'd like to share with parents, families about anything we've mentioned?
Happiness in the family. It's okay for there to be ups and downs, for there to be periods where family life doesn't feel that great, not to put too much pressure on yourself as a parent to make your kids happy. Like, that's not your job. In terms of happiness within the family, all you really can control, you can't really control whether your child is happy or not. All you can control is like the conditions for happiness. And in a family, it is, I guess, knowing your child loves you love them and them feeling that love. It is boundaries, like children feel safe from having boundaries, knowing what they can do and what they can't do, and what, you know, is going to keep them safe and not safe. And ultimately, I would say to parents, like, really focus on your happiness and well-being, because there is a really clear link that when children have happier parents, they tend to be happier too. And so I guess that gives parents permission to, it's not even be selfish, but to really prioritize themselves. I know so many parents that, their focus is just their children and they kind of neglect themselves, and that might work in the short term, but in the long term, that's not great. So, yeah, my message to parents is, how much pleasure and purpose are you currently experiencing in your own life? And if things are slightly out of balance, just take some small steps to try and increase either of those to, yeah, lead a happier life yourself.
Very well said. Thank you so much, Adrian Bethune, for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Of course. If this conversation resonated with you, bring these skills home to your kids. Cappy's Journey is a free gamified mindfulness app that helps kids build calm, focus, and emotional awareness through playful daily practice.